In 1970, Florida was growing fast. New highways, new neighborhoods, new faces arriving every day. But in that same year, a quiet act of violence took place. One that would remain hidden for half a century. There were no headlines, no press conferences, no arrests, just a victim, a crime scene, and a killer who vanished in a time. This is the story of Curtis McGirt, a case that went cold in 1970 and was finally solved in 2020, nearly 50 years later. This is not just a story about murder. It's a story about lost evidence, changing technology, and how time itself can become the greatest obstacle to justice. Florida in the late 1960s and early 1970s was a very different place. Law enforcement relied on eyewitness statements, handwritten reports, basic forensic tools. There was no DNA testing, no computados databases, no national fingerprint sharing like today. If a case didn't have a witness, a confession, or clear physical evidence, it often went nowhere. That's the world Curtis McGirt lived in. Curtis McGirt was a young man living in Florida in 1970. He wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't powerful. He was ordinary, and that mattered more than it should have. People who knew him described him as quiet, hardworking, someone who kept to himself. He had plans. He had family. He had a future. But in 1970, Curtis McGirt disappeared from that future. In 1970, Curtis McGirt was found dead. The exact circumstances were unclear from the start. What investigators did know: Curtis had been murdered. The crime appeared intentional. Someone close enough had the opportunity. There were no security cameras, no cell phones, no GPS data, just a body and unanswered questions. Local Florida law enforcement opened a homicide investigation. They canvassed the area. They interviewed people who knew Curtis. They looked for motives, but problems quickly emerged. Witnesses gave conflicting statements. Some refused to talk at all. Others claimed they didn't see anything. Physical evidence was limited. What little was collected was stored using 1970 standards, not knowing how important it might one day become. Within months, the case slowed. Then it stopped. By the mid-1970s, the Curtis McGirt murder investigation was officially cold. Detectives retired. Files were boxed up. Leads dried out. Curtis McGirt became another name in a filing cabinet. For decades, nothing happened. No arrests. No suspects charged. No closure. Time passed, and time erased memories. Cold cases don't just sleep. They decay. Evidence gets lost. Paper degrades. Witnesses die. In the McGirt case, some witnesses moved away. Others passed on. Some could no longer remember details. And the killer? He aged. He lived his life, possibly believing he would never be caught. Everything changed in the late 1990s and early 2000s. DNA technology exploded. Old evidence, once considered useless, became powerful. Across the United States, police departments began reopening cold cases. Florida was no exception. The Curtis McGirt file was still there, waiting. In the late 2010s, Florida investigators reviewed unsolved homicides. Curtis McGirt's case stood out. A clear homicide. Preserved physical evidence. No identified suspect. Detectives asked a simple question. What if the answer has been here all along? They sent preserved evidence for modern DNA testing. The results changed everything. DNA, recovered from the crime scene, was entered into modern databases. A match emerged. Not a name at first, but a genetic profile. Investigators used genetic genealogy, a technique that compares crime scene DNA to public ancestry databases. Slowly, a family tree formed, then a suspect. After nearly 50 years, detectives identified the man responsible for Curtis McGirt's murder. The suspect had lived freely for decades, avoided suspicion, never been charged. Investigators confirmed. The DNA matched. The timeline fit. The opportunity was there. In 2020, the case was officially solved. This case wasn't delayed because no one cared. It was delayed because the technology didn't exist. Evidence couldn't speak yet. Time was ahead of justice. Curtis McGirt didn't get justice in 1970, but he wasn't forgotten. For Curtis McGirt's family, the news was overwhelming. 50 years of questions, 50 years of silence, 50 years of waiting. Closure doesn't erase pain, but it answers the hardest question of all. Who did this? Cases like Curtis McGirt sent a message. You can run, you can wait, you can hide, but time is no longer on your side. DNA doesn't forget. Files don't disappear forever, and justice can arrive late, but it can still arrive. Curtis McGirt wasn't a headline name, but his case proves something important. Every life matters. Every victim deserves answers, no matter how long it takes. Curtis McGirt was murdered in Florida in 1970. His killer walked free for nearly 50 years. But in 2020, the truth finally surfaced. Justice was delayed, but was not denied. This was the Curtis McGirt case. Thank you for listening.